Hi everyone and welcome in this new video. A few days ago I asked you to share your shots that you'd like me to review and give feedback on, and oh boy did you deliver. So we then made a live stream that lasted for 5 hours where I checked as many shots as I could, and from this we identified 6 types of classic mistakes easy to fix in virtual photography. So today's video is here to sum it up in a clearer and more efficient way for you. So let's go! The first issues we saw a lot, and that was absolutely not a surprise for me, are the mistakes in aspect ratios. So to be more specific, I'd say that it's the lack of awareness around it. People, especially newcomers, tend to not even think about it. Now, the importance of aspect ratios is tremendous in a composition. It will define the shape of your canvas, and with it, what space you'll have to fill. So it's literally the most important thing, right? When you move into a new apartment and try to figure out where you'll put the furnitures, the walls are indeed the most important limit you'll consider, right? So it should be the same in your pictures, and the aspect ratio will define a lot. We shoot verticals at 9:16 aspect ratios because most of our screens nowadays are 16:9 aspect ratio. The story and reasons why and how TV screens and PCs later on changed from 4:3 to 16:9 is complicated, but anyways, this is now our standard format for the last 20 years. And boy, I remember when it was not. But does that mean that photography rules, composition, usual structures changed? No, of course. And yeah, if a 16:9 aspect ratio fits very well most of our needs in photography, it's really another story for vertical shots. Again, I will make a separate video about this, so no big explanation here, but I encourage you strongly to consider cropping your vertical shots into a 3:4 or 3:2 aspect ratio. We'll see some examples. Most of the time, vertical 9:16 shots will have too much sky and or too much floor. It usually becomes distracting, like here with the electric cables that don't really bring anything or any important element to the subject of the shot, that is the blue totally and the cool reflection. So this is what I propose, a framing that brings the full attention on the actual subject, getting rid of all the distracting elements in the sky. Yeah, because too much sky can also be a source of disappointment. When your eyes see that much space up, you tend to expect something to happen there. In this beautiful shot, almost half of the picture is empty. And even though you could think it brings the idea of freedom or something like this, it doesn't really work for me here. So I would either crop it down to this, or why not change the position of the sun? Placing it higher in the sky does create a relation between the two elements, because it now creates a segment between them. The space in between exists and fills the frame. But it also works on a horizontal shot. Even though most of our usual composition can sit well in a 16:9, and if the 21:9 is also a popular choice for very wide landscapes, for instance, we forget 4:3, not even to mention 1:1 aspect ratios, pretty fast. And yet, it can be very helpful, like in this shot. Here, the whole composition revolves around that strong perspective. The left part of the shot here doesn't really help, and even gives too much background to see. I like the Dutch angle of the floor line there, but I'd still consider it secondary in the shot and would choose a narrower framing like this. It even allows you to bring Carl's eyes on a better composition line. Note that I also pushed the blur effect and brightened up the gun cannons to insist even more on that composition strong choice. I'm not saying it's the only aspect ratio fitting this type of shot. A much wider one could work, at the condition that you think it as such from the start, so you can fill your frame in a balanced way. I tried this once in this control shot. To be frank, tilt should not even be called tilt, but roll. Actual tilt is this movement of camera when you look up and down on the fixed position. Roll is the one when you break your neck. It's a mistake that somehow became the norm even into photo mode nomenclatures, so I will sadly keep it wrong and call it tilt. There is a composition type called Dutch angle that I mentioned just before. It's often used to portray psychological uneasiness or tension in the subject or stuff like this. It was strongly used in German expressionist cinema, for instance. But anyways, in photography there are many ways or reasons for you to tilt your shot. So let's see. First off, the balance of power. My favorite use of tilt will come in action shots, for instance, and often in fighting situations. Look at this beautiful shot. The scene is tilted to the right, meaning that the photographer chose to put Kratos higher than Thor. I'm not sure why, but I would guess they tried to reinforce the feeling of power. It was a great idea and I would personally use it the same way. The only detail that went a bit wrong here, in my opinion, and honestly you can fight me here, is that the effect would work better if it was the opposite direction. I think putting the heaviest fire up gives more weight and more threatening feel to his attack, and therefore exaggerate the feeling of overcome that Kratos produces to strike. It looks like he's jumping at him, if you will, or just producing a bigger effort, giving him the strongest aspect. It's sometimes really hard to know which way to tilt your shot, or how far. A great friend of mine who taught me a lot about this told me that it has to feel right and that you should stop when you start tilting your head naturally. Great advice, huh? But you know what? I agree. Actually, trust your gut and try everything and see where the balance starts to feel off. It's kind of a different problem in this one. The arm and the dragon snake are the spine of the shot here, so having it slightly off can be quite bothering. We are not in a strong decision like a Dutch angle would be. Here, it's clearly just a small mistake that you can fix in any editing software or app. So this is what I propose. Another classic mistake is when you shoot something with strong line, such as windows or Japanese shojis like here. It's not much, but not having the exact alignment on the four sides of the shot is a bit unsettling. Easy fix in post-edit though, so that will bring that extra satisfying feel to the viewer. A really great example of tilt use can be seen in this shot. Breaking the structures of the door frame, giving an unsettling feel, it's all there, and also great aspect ratio. Next. This one is another one of my obsessions. I don't even know if there is a proper way to call that, so I'm just gonna say that you want to keep your character easily spottable in your shot. It's particularly important in tiny man shots where you'll have your character super small in the big environments, you know, for big scale and gigantic feel and stuff like this, or as the vanishing point of your shot. During the live we talked about this shot that has a couple of different problems despite having a great starting ID. The 9:16 aspect ratio could actually work here, for instance, to enhance the height of the building. Unfortunately here the main problem is that we lose track of Spider-Man. The choice of costume, even if it makes sense story-wise, it's certainly not the best here. If you want to keep it black, then you need to move your character where he can have a clear background. This way, his silhouette will be much easier to spot. I couldn't really fix that one with one of my crappy edits, so let's check another example. Here I just changed the position of Saga so her background wouldn't be half the dark wall of the house and half the clearer sky, so now we can see her a bit more easily. In this one, well, first we can notice the 9:16 aspect ratio and the quite distracting shiny floor, so let's get rid of this. Then the character in the center of the shot is hard to read because only the head is distinct from the background. If you can't place it better, you can still try to fix this in post by brightening up the background. Here I use the Density Plus tool to help. But it can only be an emergency solution if you just didn't notice it at the time of the shot. Otherwise, I would definitely encourage you to make the subject very distinct in your composition, like in this great shot from Millennium VP or this one by Magdalena. This is a mind-tricking one. Very often you'll find your shots way darker than what you actually shot once they are out of the game. Well, if it's true that if you play on an HDR TV, your shot won't render like what you saw once displayed on a non-HDR device, it can also happen to everyone for a more simple reason. When you're immersed in the game, your eyes are used to the light, or more importantly, the darkness. If you work 10 minutes on your shot, you bet you saw it perfectly, like a cat in a dark bedroom snapping at your toes. But once it's in the outside world, it becomes way too dark. Well, yeah, if you don't anticipate this when you shoot, you should absolutely fix it in post. Note that it's usually easier to brighten up a shot in post-edit than darken it. If your sky is full white, for instance, it will be much harder to bring back details afterwards. In virtual photography, we're not shooting in RAW, so you should prepare for different brightnesses. I usually take a couple of shots at different exposures, so I can mix them up if I need afterwards. In this shot, for instance, I'm sure having been in the night of that desert for a while made it easy to see in details for the photographer. But for the audience, this might be much more complicated. You should definitely consider brightening it up quite a bit to find the feeling you actually had while snapping. This example works too. If you watch the shot in a very small size, it will help you realize that it's just a dark mass. That's something you can do easily. Go away from your shot, watch from afar, or zoom it out a lot, and you'll see right away if it's readable or not. Actually, Claude Monet, the painter who made those huge paintings, had big mirrors behind him in his atelier, so he could see the painting from a distance just by turning around. I'm not saying you should shoot in a dense studio, but you got the idea. Another quick example with this one, because it gives me the opportunity to talk about another bonus mistake. So first off, shots too dark, okay, so there it is more understandable. But I also want to point out that the red light source here, it's very distracting because everything else in the shot is blue. So you can either get rid of it in post-edit or by framing your scene differently, or make a use of it. If the game allows you to, you could add a light source on your character, so the light has a reason to be in the scene. Terrible editing here, but again, just to demonstrate my point. The use of negative space is always a tricky one. It can be used to isolate an element in the shot. It works great on minimal photography, for instance, or more often to give space to a gaze. During the live stream, we saw a couple of examples that could illustrate that well. In this one, the character looks on the left, and the negative space is on the right. To me, it kind of breaks the strength of the look. It feels like she's looking at a wall to her face. The viewer cannot really make this gaze exist in their mind. I think that opening the space in front of the eyes gives them more room to breathe. Same here. I think it's always beneficial to think your composition with the gaze as the starting point and open up a negative space to make it exist. Try to keep it balanced though, otherwise you lose the intensity of the gaze. Also note that sometimes it can be tricky to decide. In this shot, for instance, first off, I think it's too dark, as we discussed a minute ago, but the negative space is debatable. The character is looking to the right, and the negative space is on the left. So my first tendency would be to open the space in front of him, or her. But looking at it a bit more, you can see that the character is actually looking kinda back over the shoulder. So after all, I think it still works to keep the open space behind the character. So you need to consider different aspects and not only the direction the character is facing to decide where to put your open space. Okay, last but not least, a very common mistake, and for good reasons. distracting backgrounds. Because we shoot games because we intervene in the middle of a story of an existing world and not in a studio, we very often find ourselves with a lot happening in the background. There are many ways to attenuate this. For instance, in portrait you will put a strong dwarf on the background, or you can also place your characters close to a wall, etc. Problem is, you can't always do it. If you can use a very long range of the camera and then a super strong telefocus, a zoom in, you'll be able to make some small parts of the background look much bigger and use them as an actual solid background. Whatever the way you're gonna use for this, try to remember when you shoot that background matters. Again, we tend to focus our attention on the subject we stopped for, but the viewers will have to deal with the flat image first. In this case, it's very easy to forget about the branches in the background, because they are part of the world, and when we are in this 3D world, we don't even consider them. We want the pendant. But once on a flat image, you start to see that this big branch in the background is actually taking away the attention from the necklace. So I tried a messy catch-up here to demonstrate the point, but of course that's not working either. I'm pretty sure in this case, putting the camera up of a few centimeters in-game would have made the background branch move away from our main subject. Also, I tried a different aspect ratio here, but that was purely for the sake of trying. Final example will be this wonderful and loving hands of Antea and Red, the doomed lovers of Banishers. Well, the hands, their love, and the creepy dude standing back there. Trying to isolate the hands with a less distracting background will help a lot. Side note on this shot, the thumb of the woman going into the hand texture of the man, that's probably not something you want in such a shot. It will take away the immersion and a huge part of the feelings you wanted to convey. This is another of the particularities we have to deal with as photographers of virtual worlds. And that's it for today, my friends. I hope you learned some interesting things that will help you shooting even better shots in the future. Drop a comment to give me your impressions or your tips. The live was very fun to do. I will most certainly do it again, maybe with more prep so it doesn't last 5 hours. I might do the selection work I did here up front the live. We'll see when the time comes. For now, I'll leave you to it. Please like the video if it helped you, because it helps me. Subscribe to the channel if you think it might please you. Follow me on my socials, mainly on X. This is where I'm the most active with daily shots from various games. I'll see you in the next video, and in the meantime, keep snapping.